The very first thing you do every single morning is a physical action you have practiced for so long that your brain no longer even registers it happening. You open your eyes in the quiet darkness of your bedroom. You hear the faint hum of the refrigerator down in the kitchen or the sound of a car passing by a few streets over. You reach over, you silence the alarm clock, you throw the heavy blankets off your chest, you swing your legs over the side of the mattress, and you stand up. You walk straight toward the bathroom to start your day. It takes about 15 seconds from start to finish. It is the most automatic, unthinking routine in the entire human experience. You have done it exactly the same way since you were a young adult. But I am going to tell you something that took me by absolute surprise, something that scared the pride right out of me. If you are over the age of 60, and especially if you take a little round pill every day for your blood pressure or your heart, that 15-second routine is a mechanical trap. It is a quiet, invisible vulnerability that is waiting for you in the dark. And if you do not understand the mechanics of what happens inside your body when you go from lying completely flat to standing completely upright, that simple act of getting out of bed can be the most dangerous thing you do all day. For the vast majority of my life, I took my mornings for granted. When I was a younger man raising my family back in Columbus, Ohio, the morning was my proving ground. I worked in community health education, but my father had been a factory man, and he taught me that the way a man gets out of bed says everything about his character. When the alarm went off at 5:30 in the morning, you did not lie there. You did not stretch. You threw the covers back and you hit the floor walking. You proved to yourself and to the world that you were ready to work. It was a matter of discipline. It was a matter of pride. I carried that pride with me for 50 years. Even after I retired and moved down here to the warm desert of Scottsdale, Arizona, I kept that same industrial rhythm. I did not have a factory to go to, but I had my morning walk, I had my coffee to brew, and I had my routine. I thought my body was the exact same piece of machinery it had always been. I thought the engine would just keep turning over exactly the way it did in 1975. Then a few years ago, when I was 78, the machinery stuttered. It was a Tuesday morning in November. The air outside was cool. The alarm on my nightstand went off at 6:15. I did what I had done 10,000 times before, so I pushed the blankets aside, swung my legs over the edge of the mattress, and stood up immediately to walk to the bathroom. The moment my feet hit the floor and I stood at my full height, something felt profoundly wrong. The room did not just spin. It felt like the entire foundation of the house had dropped 3 feet out from under me. A rushing sound filled my ears like a heavy wind blowing through a narrow tunnel. My vision narrowed down to a tiny gray pinpoint. My legs, which have carried me reliably through my entire life, suddenly felt like they were made of water. I stumbled forward, completely out of control, and my shoulder slammed hard into the wooden door frame of the bathroom. I slid down the door frame and ended up sitting heavily on the cold tile floor, clutching the edge of the porcelain sink, breathing heavily in the dark. I sat there for a long time, feeling a cold sweat break out across my forehead. After about a minute, the gray fog cleared from my eyes. My heart stopped hammering against my ribs. The room stopped tilting. I was fine. I pulled myself up using the edge of the sink, splashed some cold water on my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. I told myself the exact same lie that millions of older adults tell themselves every single morning. I told myself I just got up a little too fast. I told myself I must not have slept well, or maybe I was just tired. I blamed it on simply getting older, and I swept the fear under the rug. I did not tell my kids. I did not tell my doctor. I went out for my morning walk and pretended it had never happened. 3 weeks later, it happened again. Only this time I did not make it to the door frame. I stood up from the bed, took one step, and my knees buckled completely. I went down hard on one knee, catching myself on the edge of Margaret's old wooden nightstand. The heavy lamp on top of it rattled, threatening to fall. If I had hit my head on the corner of that solid wood, I would have been unconscious on the floor of an empty house. I would have been another statistic, another old man who suffered a catastrophic fall in the early hours of the morning. That second time broke through my stubbornness. The fear of losing my independence, the fear of ending up in a hospital bed with a fractured hip and a slow, quiet decline finally outweighed my Midwestern pride. My son Daniel is a physical therapist up in Denver. He understands the architecture of the human body better than anyone I know. He came down to Arizona to visit me a few weeks later. We were sitting out on the back patio drinking iced tea in the afternoon heat, and I finally admitted to him what had been happening. I told him about the gray vision, the sudden weakness, the terrifying feeling of the floor dropping away right after I stood up from bed. Daniel set his glass down. He did not look surprised. He looked at me with the serious, focused expression he uses when he is evaluating a patient. He told me that what I was experiencing was not just a natural, unavoidable part of getting older. It was a mechanical failure in the plumbing and the electrical wiring of my body. It is a condition with a long medical name, orthostatic hypotension, but Daniel translated it into terms I could actually understand. He asked me to picture a tall office building with a heavy water pump in the basement. When the building is lying flat on the ground, the water flows easily from the basement all the way to the penthouse. The pump does not have to work very hard because it is not fighting gravity. That is your body when you are lying in bed asleep. The blood is distributed evenly from your head to your toes. Your heart is beating slowly, comfortably, and your blood pressure drops down to a nice, low, resting state. But when you suddenly stand that building upright, gravity takes over instantly. About 3 cups of heavy blood immediately drops out of your chest and falls straight down into your legs and your belly. The penthouse, which is your brain, suddenly loses its water pressure. In order to keep you from passing out, the electrical sensors in your neck and your chest have to instantly recognize that the pressure has dropped. They have to send a lightning-fast electrical signal to your brain, and your brain has to send a signal back down to your blood vessels. The blood vessels in your legs have to clamp down hard, and your heart has to speed up, forcefully pushing that heavy fluid back up the pipe against gravity to keep your brain supplied with oxygen. Daniel explained that when we are 30 or 40 years old, that entire electrical and mechanical reaction happens in a fraction of a second. It is entirely seamless. You stand up, the vessels clamp down, the heart pumps, and you never feel a thing. But when you cross over into your late 60s, 70s, and 80s, the wiring in that automatic system gets a little rusty. The sensors are not as sharp as they used to be. The electrical signal travels just a little bit slower. When an 80-year-old man stands up quickly, the fluid drops into his legs, but it takes his body 3 or 4 full seconds to realize what has happened and send the signal to clamp the pipes. That 3 or 4 second delay is the window of extreme vulnerability. That is the exact window where the brain has no oxygen. That is where the dizziness lives. That is where the sudden weakness strikes. And that is exactly where the catastrophic life-ending falls happen in the early morning. But Daniel told me that the rusty wiring was only the first part of the problem. He asked me about my evening habits. He asked me what time I drink my last glass of water before bed. I told him I usually stop drinking any liquids around 7 o'clock in the evening. I told him the truth, which is that I do not want to be waking up at 2 in the morning to stumble into the bathroom. It disrupts my sleep, and I hate the feeling of being tired the next day. Millions of older adults do the exact same thing. We actively dehydrate ourselves in the evening to protect our sleep. Daniel nodded. He explained that when you stop drinking fluids at 7 in the evening and you sleep until 6 in the morning, your body goes 11 hours without a single drop of new water. But you are still losing water the entire time. You lose moisture every time you exhale. You lose it through your skin as you sleep. By the time your alarm clock rings, your body is in a state of mild chronic dehydration. Think about the water pump in the basement of that building again. It is already fighting gravity. It already has rusty electrical sensors that are slow to react. But because you are dehydrated, there is physically less water inside the pipes to begin with. The total volume of your blood is lower and the blood itself is thicker like sludge. You are asking an old, slow pump to push thick hydraulic fluid up a vertical pipe without enough volume in the system. The mechanical strain on the system is immense. I was sitting there on the patio realizing that I had been setting a physical trap for myself every single night. But the final piece of the puzzle, the piece that turned a dizzy spell into a potentially deadly cardiovascular event, came from my daughter, Laura. Laura has been a registered nurse for decades, and she knows everything there is to know about how medications interact with the aging body. I called her on the telephone a few days later and told her about my conversation with Daniel. I told her about the plumbing and the electrical delay. She listened carefully, and then she asked me a question about the small round pill I take every day to manage my blood pressure. She asked me what time I take it. I told her I take it right after dinner, around 6 or 7 o'clock at night. My doctor had prescribed it years ago, and I had always just taken it with my evening meal because it was easy to remember. Laura explained something to me that I had never heard in a standard 15-minute doctor's appointment. She told me about a concept called the trough period. When you swallow a blood pressure pill, it gets absorbed into your bloodstream and does its job of relaxing your blood vessels, keeping the pressure low and safe. But medications do not last forever. They have a peak period where they are strongest, and they have a trough period where they are at their absolute weakest concentration in your blood, right before it is time to take your next dose. Because I was taking my pill in the evening, the medication was doing its heavy lifting while I was asleep. By the time 6 o'clock the next morning rolled around, that medication was in its deep trough. It was practically gone from my system. My cardiovascular system was entirely unprotected. Laura painted the complete picture for me, and it was terrifying. When my alarm went off at 6:15, my body was already in a biologically vulnerable state. The natural rhythm of the human body causes a massive surge of stress hormones like adrenaline to flood the system just before you wake up. This makes your blood more prone to clotting. My blood pressure medication was at its absolute lowest level, offering no protection against that hormonal surge. I was mildly dehydrated, meaning my blood volume was low and the blood was thick. And my automatic nervous sensors were old and slow to react. When I threw the covers off and stood up as fast as I could, I was throwing a lit match into a powder keg. My blood pressure, which was already naturally low from sleeping, plummeted even further as gravity pulled the fluid into my legs. The slow sensors failed to clamp the pipes in time. My brain starved for oxygen, causing the dizziness. In response to the crisis, my unprotected heart tried to violently accelerate to push the thick, low-volume blood upward. Laura told me that this exact sequence of events, this violent mechanical stress on an unprotected, dehydrated system, is a primary trigger for severe cardiovascular events. This is why the early morning hours, specifically between 6 and 10 in the morning, see the absolute highest rates of sudden heart attacks and devastating strokes in older adults. We are demanding maximum physical output from an engine that has no oil, low fluid, and rusty wiring. I hung up the phone with Laura, and I felt a profound sense of foolishness. I had spent my life maintaining the engine of my car, making sure the fluids were topped off and the belts were tight. But I had been treating my own heart and my own brain with complete mechanical ignorance. I was letting my pride, my desire to jump out of bed like a 30-year-old man, put my entire independent life at risk. That very next morning, I completely dismantled the routine I had followed for 50 years. I built a new routine. It is a sequence of quiet, deliberate habits that takes less than 3 minutes to complete. It costs absolutely no money. It requires no special equipment, but it completely changes the mechanical reality of waking up. When my alarm went off the next morning, I did not throw the covers back. I turned the alarm off and I lay flat on my back, looking at the ceiling. I stayed completely horizontal. Then I started with my feet. Daniel had told me that the heavy muscles in your calves are essentially secondary hearts. They are massive pumps designed to squeeze the veins in your legs and push blood back up toward your chest. Before I even moved my torso, I spent 30 full seconds pointing my toes toward the end of the bed and then pulling them back up toward my shins. I rolled my ankles in slow, wide circles. I could feel the muscles in my lower legs tightening and releasing. By doing this while I was still lying flat, I was manually waking up the secondary pumps. I was priming the engine. I was gently forcing the thick blood out of my legs and back into my core before gravity ever had a chance to pull it down. It is a simple, deliberate action that takes 30 seconds, and it completely alters the fluid dynamics in your body. After those 30 seconds, I slowly pushed myself up until I was sitting on the edge of the mattress with my feet resting flat on the floor. I did not stand up. I stayed exactly right there. On my nightstand, waiting for me, was a tall glass of room temperature water. I had placed it there the night before. I reached out, picked up the glass, and I drank the entire thing. I did not sip it. I drank 8 solid ounces of water. This is the most direct, immediate fix for the dehydration trap. You are pouring volume directly back into the pipes. You are thinning out the sludge. You are giving your cardiovascular system the raw physical material it desperately needs to maintain internal pressure when you finally ask it to fight gravity. It is the cheapest, most effective medicine on the planet. Then I initiated the hardest part of the entire routine for a stubborn old man. I sat there on the edge of the bed and I waited. I did not wait for 5 seconds. I waited for 1 full complete minute. I looked out the window. I watched the early morning light start to hit the leaves of the citrus trees in my backyard. I listened to the quiet hum of the house waking up. I forced myself to be patient. Laura had explained that sitting upright is an intermediate mechanical position. You are introducing your body to a partial gravitational load. You are giving those old, rusty electrical sensors in your neck the time they need to recognize the change in pressure. You are giving the wires time to send the signal to the brain, and you are giving the blood vessels in your legs the time to clamp down securely. You are letting the system equalize safely without demanding a sudden violent reaction. A full 60 seconds on the edge of the bed is the bridge between the vulnerability of sleep and the demands of the day. When the minute was finally up, I prepared to stand. But I did not just launch myself forward into the room. I placed my right hand flat and heavy on the solid wood of my nightstand. I kept a firm grip on it, and I stood up slowly. I kept my hand anchored to the wood for 3 full seconds after I was completely vertical. I did not hold on because I expected to fall. I held on because I was giving my body a physical safety net while it made its final mechanical adjustment to gravity. It is not an admission of weakness. It is an act of intelligent, preventative management. You are acknowledging that your balance and your blood pressure need a moment to lock into place. That morning, as I stood by the bed with my hand on the nightstand, I felt completely different. The room did not spin. My vision stayed perfectly sharp and clear. There was no rushing sound in my ears, no sudden terrifying weakness in my knees. I felt grounded. I felt solid. I felt like the engine was running smoothly and quietly. But I knew that changing my physical movements was only half the battle. I still had to address the invisible chemical vulnerability that Laura had warned me about. Later that week, I had to go to the local pharmacy to pick up a refill for my blood pressure medication. Usually, I just take the paper bag from the clerk, sign the electronic pad, and walk out the door. But this time I asked to speak to the head pharmacist. I stood at the consultation window and I told him exactly what I was taking. I explained that I was an older man, and I asked him a very specific question. I asked, based on the exact medication I am on, is taking it in the evening leaving me vulnerable to a trough period during the morning cardiovascular surge? The pharmacist actually stopped typing on his keyboard and looked at me with genuine appreciation. He told me that almost nobody ever asks that question, and it is one of the most important factors in managing medication in older adults. He pulled up my profile, looked at the half-life of my specific pill, and told me that yes, my medication was wearing off right when I needed it most. He suggested a different timing schedule, moving my dose to a different part of the day so that the peak effectiveness would overlap with the most dangerous hours of the morning. I took that information straight to my primary care doctor at my next appointment. I did not just passively sit on the exam table and wait for him to tell me my numbers. I brought my notebook. I told him about the dizzy spells. I told him about the pharmacist's recommendation, and I asked him for a specific test. I asked him to perform an orthostatic blood pressure test It is a remarkably simple test, but it is rarely done unless you specifically ask for it. The nurse took my blood pressure while I was lying completely flat on the exam table. Then she had me stand up and she took it again immediately and then again 3 minutes later. We worry about our cholesterol numbers, we worry about our diet, we worry about getting enough steps in on the pedometer, but we completely ignore the extreme violent stress we put on our cardiovascular system in the first 30 seconds of the day. We ignore the plumbing. We ignore the wiring. We let pride dictate how we get out of bed, and that pride is breaking our foundations. If you have ever felt that sudden gray fog, if you have ever felt the need to grab a door frame when you stand up, you cannot ignore it. Your body is giving you a warning light. The pump is struggling. The fluid is low. The wiring is delayed. You do not have to become a victim to this. You have the absolute capacity to protect yourself starting tomorrow morning. You do not need a prescription to do ankle circles. You do not need a doctor's permission to drink a glass of water before you stand up. You just need the discipline to slow down. Independence is the most valuable thing we possess at our age. A single fall in the bathroom, a single momentary lack of oxygen to the brain can strip that independence away forever. You protect your independence not by rushing, but by respecting the machinery that carries you. I learned this lesson the hard way, but I learned it in time. You have the information now. You know the exact mechanics of the trap, and you have the tools to disable it. Tomorrow morning, when that alarm goes off, do not throw the covers back. Lie still. Prime the pumps. Fill the tank. Let the pressure equalize. Give your heart the time it needs to do its job. Take care of your machinery, take care of your mornings, and I will see you next time.